Today I'm speaking with Larenzo Reid. Larenzo, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hey, I appreciate you having me here, Tim.
Absolutely. We've been trying to do this for quite a while, so I'm glad we finally connected. And I just have so much respect for fellow YouTubers, and we'll talk about your YouTube channel shortly. But just to get started here, Lorenzo lives in North Carolina, but he's moving shortly to Texas. And we found that he actually did used to live about 20 minutes away from me here in Georgia. But he's the father of three. He was a Marine for 8 years, even living in Germany for several of those. And he traveled to Israel, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and Rome. And he was born into a Christian family. He started questioning at 9 years old, but walked away at 30 years old. And he likes to study peer-reviewed papers on religion and archaeology. He's also, again, a YouTuber. His YouTube channel is called Deconstructing Christianity. I'll have the link beneath this video for that YouTube channel. Please go check it out, like and subscribe, and check out the great work he's doing. With that in mind, Lorenzo, please, if you could tell us more about yourself and then tell us some of your hobbies or something fun.
Hey, Tim, it's great to be here. I really appreciate the opportunity to be a part of your podcast. And one thing that you may not know about me is that I started collecting comic books when I was in the sixth grade. So I have a collection that goes all the way up to like the late 90s, and I still have them. It's like 3,000 comic books. So I'm a super comic book nerd,
Wow.
and most people wouldn't know that. Um, and also, as serious as I always seem on my videos, if I when I meet you and I greet you, all I'm looking to do is have fun. I crack jokes all the time. People always want to take me serious, but I am a very non-serious person when I just talk about
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, I'm so glad that you are a YouTuber, and I love just what you're doing. And kudos to the great topics you bring up and the great insights you bring. So I watched several of your videos, and I love it. I love what you're doing. So please keep up the great work.
it. Appreciate it. Appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Most people don't even know that I started that channel because it was for my kids, so that when they grow up, they'll be able to have my information,
Hmm.
and it just other people gravitated towards it. So I think it's a great thing to have.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, we're here, of course, to talk more about those kind of topics. I love to hear people's stories. If you could take us back when you were growing up, like what did you hear from your family and church about the Lord and about the Bible? Like what was your relationship with Jesus like? And then I'll just jump in with some questions along the way.
Yeah, well, I was born in a Baptist church. Well, I wasn't born in the church, but I was born into a Baptist family in Georgia, in Marietta, Georgia, down the street from me. And from the earliest memories of religion, of church, we would always go to church together. And I'm talking, it's me. It's not just me and my mother, and my brother and sister, but this was like my grandmother, my aunts, my uncles, cousins. So it was that type of environment where it was completely a family oriented thing. And, the Sunday dinner, the big Sunday dinner right after church kind of situation. So from my earliest memories, we was always in church. We was in church on Wednesdays. We was in church on Sundays, Sunday school, church, the regular service, and then we had evening services oftentimes. But then, we started as I got a little bit older and I started getting to around 6, 7, 8 years old, and I'm listening to the pastor and I'm starting to pay attention to what they're saying. When I was about 9, and I had just come through this process. Well, we was in this economic state where we were even more impoverished than we had been before in my mother's house, to the point where we had to go to my grandmother's house to eat, right? So we're sitting in church and I'm 9 years old, and the pastor is talking about, it's easier for an eye to go through the eye of a needle it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than it is for a rich man to enter the gates of heaven. And this was based on the story of the rich young ruler. And so he held up a sewing needle, literally like a sewing needle. And I know today that that was an incorrect teaching in its totality, but he holds up this sewing needle and he says, now, camel can't go through this. So rich people go to hell. And I'm sitting here as a poor kid, barely food to eat, thinking, I don't want to be poor. So this is stupid. I had a problem with it. I spent like the next 6 months to a year trying to figure out how to get a camel through the eye. I'm coming to the past like, well, if I liquefy the camel, it'll be hard, but I can eventually get all the liquid through the eye of a needle, things like that. And they're like, no, 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 no. And then right around 7, 8 months after him saying that, I come up to him again with another solution. And one of the mother, and I'm holding the Bible, and I'm also holding some, so I'm also holding some other information because I had started, I was always going to the library as a kid. Like I spent more time in the library than I spent on the playground. And so I would, I'm bringing additional information showing that, wait a minute, that this might not be the correct interpretation. And I thrust it in his face, literally. And one of the mothers of the church comes up to me and she says, "Stop embarrassing the pastor. You know he can't read." And
Wow.
it clicks in my mind. The Bible says, and I knew this at that age because at that age was the first time I actually read the entire Bible when I was 9. And so I knew that it says, "Study to show yourself approved," which is also something that the Baptist church, people in Baptist churches say all the time as I was growing up. Study to show yourself approved. Study to show yourself approved. So then I asked the question immediately to the mother, how can he teach me the Bible if he can't read it when it says to study to show yourself approved? And that was the first schism that my family had to deal with inside of a church environment. So, I just started asking more and more questions after that. Every time something was preached, if it didn't sound right, and now that I've read the Bible and I'm going to the library, I'm looking at reference material, I'm going through all this information. It's like it's becoming more and more apparent to me that the majority of the people who are pastors and deacons and mothers and lay scholars, that these people didn't actually know what they were talking. They had no cultural references, they had no historical references. So I spent
Hmm.
my adolescent years, studying the Bible. But the thing about it is that I had such a great desire to be Christian. That was the thing. I wasn't trying to deconstruct to leave Christianity. I was trying to be a better Christian by understanding the Bible in the same way that Moses would have,
Right.
same way that Jesus would have understood it. At those time frames, I didn't want to understand it based on how people today understand it. I wanted to understand it from their perspective. So understanding the cultural backgrounds and the cultural norms was vital to my studies back then. And I was looking to incorporate those things into my life because I was like, okay, there was no Christmas tree in Jesus' time. So why do we shouldn't have a Christmas? I don't care that it still comes from a Christian mindset. We still shouldn't have it. The Yule log, definitely a pagan thing. Don't have it. Halloween, no. You know what I mean? I was like, I want to get back to that time frame of understanding. Um, right down to things like the woman was on her menstrual cycle. I can't touch anything that you touch. Like that was my mentality. So through all those adolescent years, I was going through it trying to prove the Bible to be correct and just show that it is correct, but understand it and believe in it the way that it is supposed to be. That Christianity has been warped, and I was going to understand and know the true Christianity was my goal during that time frame. And I went to multiple churches and got cursed out by many pastors, called a demon, called an antichrist, called all kind of names because I was questioning. And back then, in the 70s and 80s and 90s, you didn't question pastors, right? Especially in the Black community, you didn't question a pastor at
Hmm.
all. That was definitely a cultural taboo.
I think there's
So
that verse about don't bring an accusation against the Lord's anointed or something like that, where
yeah,
it was like this reverence of you're gonna get it if you do this. It's almost like they're God's direct spokesperson on earth, and it's almost like you attack them or you question them. You're actually attacking, their heavenly
attacking
Father.
God.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that was the mentality. So you didn't do it.
Mm.
And then there's the whole respect of your elders and that sort of thing. And here I am, 11, 12, 13 years old, questioning the pastor on what he just preached, and telling him that he's incorrect, that he's wrong for what he just said.
What do you
So
think gave you the bravery to keep going with some of those for so long?
honestly, the my upbringing with my family, we A lot of people in the South and a lot of people back then grew up with the family where it was children are seen and not heard. But in my family, we could, even as children, as long as we did it respectfully, we could argue our points, right? So if something happened in the house or you did something at school, my parents, my uncles, my aunts, my grandparents, they didn't tell you to just be quiet, that you're wrong. Like, if me and my aunt had a disagreement, my grandfather he would listen to both sides. So you had a voice when I was growing up, and that is one thing. And then my grandmother, it was just a very protective grandmother. She protected her and my grandfather, actually. My grandfather protected the family physically. My grandmother protected the family emotionally. So she wouldn't allow for anyone to talk harshly towards me. So when some of those pastors had negative things to say, or some of those mothers had negative things to say, my grandmother would defend my right to think, my right to speak. So we I grew up in that type of dynamic. And so it's normal for people in my family to speak their mind and say what they want to say, but to do it respectfully.
Right.
And then so having my family's backing is like, okay, you guys are strangers. This is my family.
Yeah, that's
I,
huge.
I don't care what you guys think about me. I care about what my family thinks about me.
Yeah,
So
that's an awesome dynamic to have.
that was a great thing for me to have, and it's something that I've raised my children with as well, to be able to have that freedom to be able to stand up for yourself.
Mm.
So it would be great if everybody had, but
Yeah,
I know they don't.
it's amazing with just that one issue of like being able to question stuff and be what you might call a free thinker, to challenge the status quo. So many people do not have that, and they're really seen as shameful for doing that. Where you're like, what are you doing, bucking God or testing God? Like, just what you need most is to bow your knee. And we often, I remember growing up here in the story of Job, where Job sort of for a while defended God, but then eventually he actually turns and kind of attacks God. Is like, God, what are you doing? I'm so innocent. I don't deserve this. This is woe is me. This isn't fair. And then God speaks, and God doesn't even answer his questions. He just like, Job, who are you just to talk back to me? Where were you when I built everything and made these giant leviathans and everything?
Mhm.
You don't know anything. I built the stars, created the stars. Like, you are a nobody. And he never even answers Job's question. But then at the end, Job's like, you're right, God, and I will put my hand over my mouth and I will shut up. And that's the correct humble response. And it's so sick.
It is. It's great. It is. You know what? I might need to write that down, because that's a great video to make, because that is basically the bad parent model, right? That is the bad parent model where there's something going on. The child doesn't really understand it. The child hasn't done anything that it knows would justify the things that are happening to the child. And when the parent who actually who created the event, and the parent who created it, and the child is speaking and asking the parent, why is this happening to me? And the parent, instead of saying, well, I had a bet with the devil, and we was just testing your faith, and just being open and honest with the child and telling them what happened, instead berates the child and saying that, well, I rule this house. I built this house. I pay for the food. I buy the clothes. I do all of these things. So who are you to question me? That is the essence of seen and not heard, because Job was seen but not heard, and Job was intimidated into being quiet. And that's piss poor parenting
Yeah.
on this guy. And that was one of the things that, when I was reading the Bible, that to me was a disturbing thing. And when I went to the pastors, I was like, this isn't right. This is How can God perpetuate this mentality? And even at like 12, 13, I was like, but that is what I see you parents doing to your children. You're treating your children just like this God. And that's wrong. We would say that parent is wrong. So why aren't we saying this God is wrong? And those were the
Yeah.
kind of things that was getting me like expelled from churches. I got kicked out of like 5 churches.
Oh wow. Just because you're asking too many questions.
I'm asking too many questions.
That's very, very telling. It comes up too in is it Romans 11, I think, where Paul's talking about election, and people are asking these great questions like, well, if God elects people and once you're elect, you're secure forever, then what happened to Israel? Most of them died in the desert, and he's kind of answering all these questions, but then he gets to this big question of, doesn't God have the right to make someone like a potter with clay? Doesn't he have the right to make one vessel of clay for honor and one for destruction? In other words, doesn't he have the right to create someone purely with the intention of destroying them? And
Right.
then the question comes up that Paul anticipates. He says he's thinking people are going to say, then why is God condemning us if he's the one who makes the decisions in advance? Why is he condemning us? We're kind of passive and we have nothing to do with this. He's the one that chose that outcome for us, but we shouldn't be condemned for it because he made that choice. And instead of answering the question, Paul does the same thing as in the book of Job. Paul simply says, who are you to speak back to God? Doesn't the potter have the right to do what he wants to do with the clay? And he literally says, will the thing formed, which in Greek it's the word plasma, will the thing formed say to the one who made it, why are you making me this way? He's like, so he's basically again shutting it down and saying, just shut up. Just let God do what he wants. And just like a bad parent, I'm not answering your question. You don't know anything. I know everything. It's that whole authoritarianism going on, you know?
That's on a lot of my videos and a lot of the comments. I get people who are constantly saying that, well, God created us so God can do whatever He wants. If God allows for genocide back in the day, then so be it. If God has someone born and then they get, essayed or whatever, then God created them and that's fine. The creator can do whatever he wants to the creation. And of course, oftentimes the response is that means that if my children, I should be able to do whatever I want with them. They came through without me. My children can never have been created. So therefore, I should be able to torment them however I desire to torment them.
Yeah.
But of course, their response is always, no, well, you're not God. If it's not justifiable for us, it's not justifiable for God. If
Yeah.
what if we do something and it is considered evil and a sin, then of course, if the God does the same thing, it is an evil, it is a sin. So, but I've had many Christians utilize that piece of scripture in order to justify the genocides and things of that nature that I've often find that you find often in the Bible and the
Yeah.
treatment of slavery and things of that nature.
Mm.
So,
So going
I
back to
mean,
your story for a second, was there a point where you're in the midst of, even though you're asking all these great questions and hopefully getting some clarification as to what you personally think of it all, you're mentioning that you still wanted to do this not to buck Christianity, but to actually become a better Christian, more well informed. Was there a point at which you did, answer that altar call or whatever, pray the prayer, and give your life to Jesus in some kind of
yeah.
salvation message?
Oh, yes. Actually, twice.
Okay.
The first time that I did it, I was 15 years old and I answered the altar call, went up, got baptized. Well, not that we got baptized like the next week, became an usher in the church, and you know, I participated. The church was my second life. It was my family life and the church. Yeah, I played sports and football and went to school and those sorts of things, but it was like the church was definitely the second center of my life at that time frame. And but then I did it again. I did it again because see, I figured that I was a child then when I was, and this skips a lot of the story of how I got to the point of deconstructing. But in my mid 20s, I wound up doing it again because I felt like, well, I did it when I was 15. I was still a child. I was still
Yeah.
young. I didn't fully comprehend. But I was also greatly disturbed at that time frame when I was in like around 25, 26, because I was seeing the movement away from Christianity and I didn't want to go. I didn't want to move away from it. So I like let me double down and rededicate myself. Basically,
Like
that's
you
what it
see,
was.
like you saw people deconstructing around you.
Actually, no, no one around me was leaving Christianity. All I wouldn't even be around a person unless they were Christian. So I was feeling the trembles within myself. Like I was having a lot of the doubt because by this time frame, by the time I'm 25, I've joined the Marine Corps. I've been to Israel. I stood at the last part of the Muslim market where there's an eye of the needle, and I'm standing there and now seeing it for myself is like, and I just saw a camel like 3 weeks ago in Oman because it stepped on my tent in the middle of the night, and so here I am now. I seen a camel. I know a camel can get through this 8 foot high, 6 foot wide doorway, this gateway, And so I'm like, wait a minute. I always knew that it was a entryway into the wall, but I didn't know it was this big, and I didn't have the full concept of a camel. So now I got that in my mind, and thankfully at that time frame there was uh, a curator from the Tel Aviv Museum who was happened to be standing there, and he was like, "You're a Christian, and you just figured out what an eye of a needle is, huh?" And I was like, "Yeah." And then he broke it down to me about taking off all of your wealth and not loving all your wealth and bearing yourself down and being humble. And then he took me to show me one of the eye of the needles, the gateways that was only like 4 feet high, where you have to kind of crawl through it. So it was like, oh, okay, I was getting. So even though I was over in Israel getting deeper information, I was still relating it all back to Jesus and Christ and the Bible. Okay, the whole birth story is jacked up. It wasn't like they were looking for a hotel. This was actually just a family house. Of course, they built a church over it now, but it was a family house, and there was no room in the family house that could be unclean for 8 days. So that's why he was born, and they were down in the manger. I said, okay, so it was still making sense to me, you know, but it was actually the trip to Rome that started getting a little like, there's some political energies involved here, because when I went to Rome is when I was able to see the arc of Constantine's arc. And I'm looking at Constantine's arc, and it's in the middle of a road, so you can't like walk up to it and climb up. There's no way to climb up to it. But if you go into one of the buildings across the street and you're using binoculars and whatnot, you can see very clearly what's on the arc. So I'm looking at it, and I'm looking for signs of Jesus in the sky, crosses on the shield, but none of those things were there. What you did see was Mithra. You saw Apollo. So I'm like, okay, wait a minute. What happened to the whole story? So then I started researching Eusebius and, Eusebius of Caesarea, and like, oh, wait. Eusebius, when he first broke down the story at the Bridge of Moldova, there was no crosses, there was no signs in the sky, Jesus not in the tent and all that. Sol Invictus was. Then when he's talking to the Christian bishops in Milan, he changes the story. So that made me start looking more at the political influences on everything that was going on with the Bible and all of its writings. So now, when I'm looking at the Old Testament, I started understanding the Canaanites and their influence, the Babylonians, the Assyrians. So now the historicity of it all starts to come into play when I'm 21, 22. And so as I started studying the histories and studying the cultures and all the other cultures around it, the Bible story starts to crack a lot, you know, because I went to Israel before I went to Rome. So it's starting to crack a lot. I'm finding like other stories that were similar with the Kemetic story, and then the Anunnakis with the Sumerians. I'm like, there's a lot of cracks in this thing. So when I was like 25, I rededicated myself because I was like, no, I wanted to resist what my mind was showing me, what my eyes were showing me, what the logic was showing me, what
Mm.
true history is showing me. I wanted to reject it. I seriously used to cry at night trying to reject this thing.
Wow. There's a,
But then, go ahead.
as mentioned, there's a metaphor that comes to mind that I can relate to, that uh, it's always been in my mind as I think through these different kinds of stories. But C.S. Lewis was a Christian author. You may have heard of him, but he was originally not a Christian. He was either an atheist or an agnostic. I forget which way he would have titled himself, but he described the process for him to become a Christian, where he basically was saying, I didn't really want to become a Christian, but I couldn't deny the inevitable. Like, this has to be the one true mythology. And he says his verbiage was, I went kicking and screaming into the kingdom. Said I was the most reluctant convert in all of England, kicking and screaming, being drug in, as it were, by the angels into the kingdom. Like, it's like God's gonna save you whether you want to or not. And it's funny in a reverse sense. I feel like that's what happens to a lot of us. We're like, I am not leaving Christianity. Like, I don't care. And it's like our rationality and just information that we glean over the years, it's slowly dragging us out of the kingdom, and we're like, no, 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 do not pull me out. I will not leave the kingdom. And eventually you're just like, I can't. I might be reluctant. I might be saying I really, in one emotional level, really do not want to leave Christianity because it's home. It's your safe bet. It's your safe zone. It's who what you know, and it's what your family knows, your loved ones know. It's the promise, the heaven, the afterlife. But at the same time, there's this cognitive dissonance that eventually builds up, and you just eventually you can't unsee what you've seen, and you're like, I see the wizard behind the curtain. I can't believe in Oz anymore. Like, I know this is not what we used to think it was. And eventually it's just like, I can't do this. It's not even like I couldn't believe again if I wanted to. I can't make myself believe. I've seen too much.
Yeah, you can. And that was the problem, because once I started, once you read it, once you've seen it, and especially when you've traveled to a place and you see what you see. Like, you go to Calvary, they built a church on top of it, and they say, well, this is where the cross could have been. And then you go about 30 feet over here, and this is the tomb. But you understand the culture, and it's like, there's no way that that's the tomb right there. It's an impossibility. It would not have been that close. And then you go out to the Protestant version of it, and you see that they have the garden tombs out there. And you say, well, these are more of the probability that it could have been there. But then I started looking at the people, and these people are, oh, this is what Jesus was, and they crying and they going through all these emotions, and I'm sitting here like, they're creating their own emotions. You know, I'm seeing it, and it's moving. When you're a believer, to go to, I have pictures. There's somewhere in storage. I have pictures of me at the in Bethlehem, where at the manger site, which is, there's a church over that, kneel down and praying at the manger. So it's moving. You know what I mean? Emotionally, when you believe in it. But how much stock that so many people put into it, into a place, and giving that place power. And I had a problem with that even as a young age, that, okay, if God is a spirit, the Holy Ghost is a spirit, Jesus, the Trinity, the whole thing, why are we putting so much emphasis on material things of matter, material things that man has? Like, how are we wearing crosses? How are we, how do people go to these places and feel like, oh, I feel this power? Why we go and people spend thousands of dollars to go to be baptized in the River Jordan? And I'm just like, when it's all supposed to be something that's here and here, your heart and your mind, right? So when I see these people and they're going through all these emotions, it makes me wonder, like, how depressing is your life, that you walk into a cave, and because of something that you believe, not something that you have proof of, you give away all this energy. And even when I was there in Israel in my early 20s, I still had those kinds of thoughts, were starting to rumble through my mind as I'm witnessing people, going through what they're going through in these situations. And then I'm thinking about the biblical stories. I'm going up to Calvary and to the church that's Calvary, right? And there's all these old people with walkers and trying to make their way up there. And some of them can't go up to the part where the cross is because there's steps, and they're little, and some of them can't even go into the church because their little scooters won't go in there. And I'm thinking, like, okay, Jesus was here doing all that healing. You have all these miracles in the Old Testament. He told the disciples to go out and heal people. But yet, since the time frame of Jesus, there has not been a consistency where Christians are in the hospitals healing people. Where are they in the hospitals laying hands on people and people becoming healed from cancer, healed from arthritis, growing back appendages? Where is all of this? Because that is supposed to be the continuous thing that's going on. And I wasn't seeing that. People claim, oh, yeah, I got the power of healing. And that happened to me one time. I got the power of healing. Prayed, prayed, prayed. I still had a real bad sinus infection. This is back when we didn't know what a sinus infection was, which is an amazing thing of aging. But and when it was over, it was like, how do you feel better now? I was like, no, still feel the same way. still got this pounding in my head. Oh, where your faith wasn't strong enough.
Hmm.
And I remember when the deacon who did that said that to me. I said, did the man with the legion of demons in him have faith in Jesus? He had no faith. Didn't even know who Jesus was. But Jesus was supposed to be so powerful that he still was able to call out the legion of demons. It didn't, I was like, it doesn't require me to have faith. Even though most of the time Jesus said, it is by your faith you are healed, it doesn't require my faith if you have that power.
Right.
I don't need any faith at all. If I don't have to have faith in an antibiotic. You put the antibiotic into my body, it's going to do what it does, whether I believe in it or not. You know, and I get the placebo effect, but it was those kinds of things that just kept pushing me further and further away from it. And then I started to, study other religions, and I started to study the ancient religions, and the ancient religions were more important than studying. I did find interest in Buddhism and Taoism, but studying the things like Islam and all that kind of stuff was like, it's just another story that somebody else is doing. But when I went back and I started studying the religion of the Canaanite people, the Assyrians, the Babylonians, and I started seeing all these similarities. When I read the Atrahasis, and then read the Epic of Gilgamesh, and then the Gnostic Gospels, and understood the battle between Orthodox Christianity and Gnostic Christianity from first century all the way to fourth century, and all the political ramblings in those, and you see all these similarities and stories of the Kemetic stories and all these, and it's like, wait a minute, this story was written prior to the Noah story. The Epic of Gilgamesh is prior to the Noah story. The Atrahasis is prior to the Noah story. Yet, the Noah story has so many things that you can tell it took from that story. That this was just a Mesopotamian flood story that multiple people knew about. And every time the Israelites went under the Assyrian captivity and then went under the Babylonian captivity, they learned this story. They had an understanding of this story. And when they're trying to create their history, they incorporate it into their story and make it more of a Judaite story. So I started realizing those kinds of things.
Mm.
And those were like the final straw. That was the final straw, because it was like, okay, there's no way I'm going to worship some deity that doesn't even exist. That is a copy from somebody else's belief in a deity, from people who were trying to explain why there's the rainfall. Why is there a rainbow? They didn't understand why a rainbow appears. Why does they thought the sun went under the earth? So I'm starting to like, these people didn't have the scientific know-how, so they created a god. They created deity. It's the god of the gap, on steroids.
Yeah, exactly.
So that was like my final thing. Like, okay,
Mm.
why am I trusting in these people?
It's amazing. The way you put those pieces together, it feels like that's kind of what in different vantage points, we all kind of end up in a similar mindset of just whether we're looking more at comparative mythology, which it sounds like you were doing, and that was my path as well, or you're just looking at the suffering of maybe children in the world and the psychopathic nature of the Yahweh character. But you end up coming to this point where you're just like, this just doesn't make sense. And I think one of the hardest parts for me too, that was really difficult to deal with, was like you have that stream of like, I'm learning more, I'm thinking through it, but then when you go to Christians who you think you're kind of like, let us reason together, let's be like the Bereans and search the scriptures, let's make sure that we're seeing this correctly. When you go to them and you say, hey, I'm having this angst, I'm having these questions, most of them reveal their true colors and kind of say one way or the other, I don't want to deal with these questions, or again, you're being disrespectful, like in childhood, to the pastor, or they give you answers that are really, really, really poorly thought out, like the typical apologist answers that you hear. And eventually, it's just like there becomes these two tracks of like, I'm learning more, I'm thinking through it, but also these people that were my people, they're no longer my people, and I'm losing respect for them by leaps and bounds. And when you realize those two, and I don't think Christians really get it, that there is the things we think about and learn, but there's also the fact that once we recognize that their thought process and their ability to defend the faith, and that's what you're supposed to be able to do it. you should be ready to give a reason for the hope that's in you. So like if you're going to defend your faith and the best you've got is these awful answers, eventually it's like that becomes a double whammy. Like, oh wow, I've got the double whammy of like on the one side I'm learning stuff, on the other side my people aren't my people, and you look really stupid and foolish now. And I was with you all this time, but if I continue along your trains of thought, I feel like a fool. I feel like I'm ignoring the obvious. And it's one of those things where once you open a few of those doors and walk through them, it's like game's over. The game is over. Like you can't pull someone back, because if they try to say, well, I've got this really cool video from this Christian apologist, you're like, I've seen them, and they go from bad to worse. And they just like that's not the answer that you think it is. But when they say, oh yes, it is, this is a great answer, and you're like, that makes no sense. It's not scientifically accurate. It's not informed. It's a lot of distortion. But like, no, no, this is a great answer. You're like, oh wow, like you're actually like this is brainwashing that you have experienced. And in real time, I'm seeing you cannot think straight. You cannot think for yourself. You can't think outside the box. And in real time, it's like, oh, okay. So like I'm backing up now. Like we are not on the same page anymore. And you are truly like blinded. And just like Paul said, when I saw Jesus on the road to what was it, Damascus, when he was blinded, but then when he was with Ananias, the scales fell, and like I could see again, and you're like, okay, my scales fell, and I can see again, but you are literally covered, and the idea like the truth will set you free, but you're still in a prison, and the prison is the Bible, is a Bible prison. And man, once you put those pieces together and see that dynamic, it's enough to deconstruct and deconvert people. It's also very scary to think, holy shit, like I've been in some really, really bad ideas, and all these loved ones are neck deep in it, and they show no signs of improving and getting better thoughts. It's very scary.
It, it is a scary thing because they simply just don't want to. Like the average person. So I used to own a gym right there in Alpharetta, downtown Alpharetta, right? And so I was a personal trainer, master trainer, and nutritionist. And one of the things I used to always tell people is that until you experience enough pain, you're not going to make any changes. And most people are living, and I'll tell them that most of your life you will live in a comfortable misery, right? And that is what people are doing in these religion. That's what our family is doing. Like that's my family who's still Christian, your family who members who may still be Christian. That's what they're doing. They are comfortable in the misery of the belief that they have. For them, it is about going to heaven. I will make excuses for all the genocide and everything that I know inherently is wrong in this book. I know that now we're living in a world today where there's more access to information, but regardless of that information, I must secure my entryway into heaven. And so they will turn that blind eye and live in their comfortable misery unless something happens that they can't just makes them so uncomfortable that they have to then open their eyes. They're never going to open their eyes because that heaven story, and it's not even really getting into heaven. It's the avoidance of hell. That is the main reason most Christians stay Christian is the avoidance of hell. It's out
Yeah.
of the fear of it, and they won't. And then and to another point that you was talking about, as far as a lot of these pastors are concerned, my experience has been a little bit different than most people's experience. Now, don't get me wrong. When I was a kid, most pastors cursed me out to a certain, Christian cursed me out. But as an adult, once I came back from Germany in '97. So, and as an adult, uh, every pastor that I've ever encountered, that I've ever been under, and even when I was like a teen minister, and then as I started breaking away, every pastor that I still know of actually knows that they're teaching incorrect, but their finances, their livelihood is so tied into it that they can't walk away. I literally
Mm.
still to this day have three of them who call me every 6 months to a year trying to figure out how can they financially shift so that they can walk away from the church because they're part of the organization. These aren't pastors who are like, I'm a small little Baptist pastor for this one Baptist church. I'm a part of the Methodist organization. So their whole life is tied up into it.
Hmm.
And so they're looking for ways out. Even so, a lot of these pastors are looking for ways out, but they don't have it. And when they call me, it's not only just asking for what process they can do to get out. They want to. I'm like the person they know they can have these conversations about what's wrong with the Bible and what's wrong with Christianity and its teachings, and not worry about it backlashing on them in their community, and they're not prepared to uh, walk away from religion because
Hmm.
like one of them, he got kids in school and he got kids in college, and his wife doesn't work, and so everything that they have is based on the church organization.
Yeah.
So
It's a hard
like
place to
he,
be. It really is. And just as a quick aside for anybody that is in that spot, literally like they're that pastor. I'll put a link beneath this video for the Clergy Project. I'm sure you know that group, but the Clergy Project is a great place where people who are stuck in it can get help, very anonymously, keep it completely stealthy, but talk to people, other people who were in that same boat who've gone and been able to escape and become public, and it's no longer a big deal, and they can make ends meet. But the Clergy Project is a great starting point for anyone in that situation.
never heard of that. I will
Oh,
send
really?
them that
Okay.
message today. I'll send that to them today. I didn't know about that.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah, and it's I would say also it's connected to the I believe the Recovering from Religion group. So there's kind of like two parts. They help people in general, but they also are helping people, the clergy that are stuck in that. And it's a hard place to be because your integrity is really at stake in the long run. I mean, it's one thing to like say a fake prayer maybe once at Thanksgiving dinner or something just to please great grandma because she's going to be offended if you don't say it. But it's another thing like day in and day out be telling people I preach this gospel and I mean it, like you really are sinners on the way to hell and there really is heaven to be had if you're willing to bow your knee and accept the gospel. I mean, to put your whole life into this day after day, week after week, year after year, it's just like wow, like you can't you eventually have to say I'm living a lie. That's a horrible place to be, and I get it. I'm glad I've never had to go through that particular part of this route, but it's a very sad situation, and my heart goes out to people with that. But it's really cool that they can lean on you for just the open door to say like let's talk about these issues, and you can be a sounding board, and they're not going to feel like you're going to ever go public with their names, but that people need that they need our support and they need our help very privately. In terms of when you hit that point in your life there where you were like I am definitely out, was the issue of the afterlife a hard thing, or were you already deconstructing so much that it was not a big deal?
It wasn't a big deal because part of my deconstructing was, and as I was saying, I started going back into the old mythologies and things of that nature. But I also started looking start. That is also when I started studying philosophy as well. So I had been studying like Nietzsche and the Stoic philosophy, loved Marcus Aurelius. So in my study of philosophies, and then when I got to Plato and Plato's, you start hearing about the Atlanteans, and then that led me to basically the Corpus Hermetica. And when I got now getting into the Corpus Hermetica changed a lot because now it's okay. I'm reading the Emerald Tablets. I'm looking at the Kabbalion. So I'm really starting to understand Hermetics, and in understanding Hermetics, as I read it, I can see the Hermetic teachings in every mythology. Like the Hermetics are in everything, and the Hermetics are old. Are old. It's some of the oldest knowledge that we have, some of the oldest philosophy that we have. And it's pure just philosophy. It's not trying to tell you to worship any deities or anything of that sort, even though the Emerald Tablets gets a little bit deity-ish. But even when you look at some of that, it's not really talking about a deity like the nine lords, is actually nine frequencies. So as I started studying the Hermetics and stuff, and the Kabbalion is a great book to start. I always tell people to start with the Kabbalion if they're going to study Hermetics, because it simplifies everything to the point where it's easy for you to understand. And in reading the Kabbalion and understanding how everything is energy and everything is thought, then and knowing that energy cannot be destroyed, but it only transmutes from one thing to the next thing to the next thing relative to whatever level of vibration that it takes on. I lost the fear of death because I recognize that I will never die. Now, the only question then becomes, do I maintain the complexity of my mental energy, or do I lose the complexity? If I lose the complexity of it and it's just dispersed as my body will be dispersed into multiple forms of energy, then it doesn't matter because I wouldn't have the consciousness of me, right? But if it maintains itself as a me consciousness, knowing of myself, then it is up to me to determine where my consciousness goes, and understanding the law of correspondence, as above, so below. Do I rise up or do I lower myself? Which is based on whatever level of vibration or thought process I have now. And that will determine. So I'm the determining factor, not some deity, not the actions that I've done in my life, not my belief, not any of those things. What determines what happens to me after death, if my consciousness maintains its cohesion, is me and nothing else. So another book is the Tibetan Book of the Dead, which I began to study after I understood the Hermetic books of the Kabbalion and the Corpus Hermeticum. And see, in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, it talks about that it presupposes that your mind, you're going to maintain your complexity of mind. And when you do, you go into this space. You're offered to go into the higher levels of consciousness, but at the same time, the demons that you believe in on earth, and you got to think about, all Christians believe in demons. They believe in the devil and they believe in demons just as much as they believe in God and the angels. But your mind will conjure up these demons. And if you think about Christianity, you've been taught that you're a filthy rag and you're not worthy, that is only through Jesus that you will be saved. But if your mind gets so caught up and trapped on these demons, according to samsara, you will stay stuck in this realm for a long time, which could be like hell. But
Mm.
at all times, you will have the availability to come to the realization to enter any of the other portals. Portals to the higher realm will be open, but most people, according to the Tibetan religion, Tibetan Buddhism, will choose to come back to a portal that leads back to earth. And it'll be one that you're most attracted to, that is most similar to the life that you previously led. And you will come back to earth through that portal. How much time passes, they don't know. Could be 1,000 years, could be 2 years. But that's the process. So that process is kind of like, not that I believe that process 100%, but when I think about it consciously with the complexity of your mind, right? Everything that you truly believe, not the BS that you say out front, like the things that you just say, like when people are at church and they're like, oh, yes, Jesus is the head of my life. And then they going out partying and drinking and smoking and fornicating and doing all this other stuff the next day. No, that real thought that you believe, which most Christians' real thought is that they're not worthy of heaven, that they should be going to hell, that, his sacrifice was so sweet and so loving, but they're not worthy of it. They're going to manufacture some kind of hellscape for themselves. So I started thinking about what my true consciousness is. What do I truly believe? And I had to go through the process of formulating my true thoughts based on information that is observable. Only I can't observe heaven or hell. I can't observe samsara at all. You can't. What I can observe is that there are different levels of consciousness on this planet. Like there's the human mind, there's the animal mind, there's the plant mind, there's the atomic mind. So there are different complexities of mind. So if there's and humans aren't the top banana, there got to be a more complexity of mental of mind. So I can reach that. That is what Buddha was talking about by acquiring the Buddha head, is the Buddha mind rather, is to reach that level of complexity of mind. The way to not reach that is to believe in these demons and all these sorts of things, when the true demon is just the negative part of your own brain, right? Um, and that negative part of your brain, which I forgot his first name, but his last name is Hill. But his book Outwitting the Devil is a great book, another great book to read, because he talks about that the devil is truly just the negative portion of your brain. That's it. It's you. So if I'm smarter than the negative part of my brain, if I develop the other side of my brain at a higher vibration, then there is no reason for me to experience any hellscape if I raise my complexity. So I lost that whole fear of death. I lost that whole fear of going to hell, the loss of heaven. I generate heaven.
Mm.
I generate heaven. You generate heaven on right now if you choose to. Like us having this conversation is heaven to me. Now, me going to the gym after is hell, right? So you generate heaven and earth now, and if your complexity is able to maintain itself at the point of leaving this matter plane of existence, then you generate heaven and hell at the next level as well, right? And the Bible even tells you that in a sense. How can there, if there is no hell, if there, okay, let me rephrase it. Bible also tells you that because when you look at the Bible, according to the books of Enoch, which is quoted throughout the actual Bible that you have, there was a war in heaven. If heaven is supposed to be the abode of God, how can there ever have been a war in heaven unless the same negative and positive that exist on our matter plane, the same negative and positive will exist on the heavenly plane? There is no such thing as a perfected heaven. So why am I trying to get to a perfected heaven that doesn't exist, nor can it ever exist? Because there's higher and lower vibration at every scale of consciousness. In the story of Job that we talked about earlier, Satan was going back and forth from heaven to earth, right? So if Satan, even though Satan, Lucifer, the serpent, and the dragon are not the same thing, not the same being, but for Christian minds, Satan was going to heaven at the heavenly council. So he has access to heaven at any time that Satan wants to. So what is this perfected heaven that Christians believe that they're trying to get to? It doesn't exist. It's a tool of control to keep people believing that I need to follow the government, I need to follow the church, I need to follow whomever has the authority, because that I need to get to this perfect heaven that doesn't exist at all, never exists. It's kind of like, I also love animation. You remember the movie The Cruise?
Yes.
He was always trying to get to tomorrow,
Right.
and is tomorrow is never today. But I mean, I get his parents. His parents were trying to tell him just live another day, just live another day. I get what they were trying to say, but the idea that he thought tomorrow was a place that you can get there to tomorrow. That's heaven. It's tomorrow. But in truth, it'll never be reality, because the perfect heaven is always the next level, the next level, the next level, because there will always be some lower vibrational things at every level of creation, whether you believe it, whether because it's already at every level that we can observe.
Mm.
Right? We're talking about the atomic mind, the atomic plane. There are negatives and positives. The same thing with the animal mind, the plant mind, the human mind. There are negatives and positives. It is
Yeah.
just where do we elevate?
Mm. So as
I
you're
know I'm
as
going
you're putting all
long.
this as you're putting all those pieces together, how did Christians respond to you when you started to eventually become vocal enough to say, like, look, I'm not asking hard questions anymore, and I'm not looking for your answers. I'm actually out. How'd they respond to you?
Well, I mean, of course, there was the let's talk about it, let's pray about it. And I was like, I'm not praying about it. We can talk about it, debate about it. As far as praying about it, that's not going to happen. And we actually just had intelligent discussions. Now, these were the Christians that I knew. These were the ones in Marietta that I grew up around. All the pastors that I know, one of those pastors and some of those people are there in Alpharetta with you. These were some of those people, because they had respect and love for me in their heart, and I had respect and love for them, and I showed them that. We just had great conversations, and still 90% of those people we are still connected, right? The ones that get the anger, the name calling are the ones who don't know me, are the ones who just show up on YouTube, show up on Facebook. They've never met me before. They have no idea who I am. And I am the most evil thing that they have ever seen before, and they have no idea. They don't even know me. Without them seeing me online, if I saw them on the side of the road in a broke down car, I'm the guy that pulls over, you know, without question. How can I help you? I'm that guy, but they hate me. So uh, my family is still my family. I still go to the Christmas parties. We have a Christmas party every year. We have family vacation every year. Um, We have events. There's like 90 of us in Marietta and Cobb County. So we all get together. It's nothing but love. They know where I stand. They make jokes. I make jokes about them too. So, it's fine. It's just the people who don't know me.
Yeah.
Those are the ones. I even
Well,
get every now and then I get the death threats.
wow.
Yeah.
That's scary. I love that you have been able to maintain those relationships to such a great extent, because for a lot of people, as I'm sure you're well aware, there's hell to pay, especially like if you're from a JW perspective, where they literally are not allowed to talk to you, and it gets crazy in some of these scenarios.
Yeah. Sometimes I do feel guilty about, well, I feel guilty for like that long about my situation because the majority of people who have deconstructed that are on my pages, they didn't have that experience. They lost family members. They got brothers, sisters, cousins, aunts and cousins, and mothers, and everybody who like don't talk to them anymore, don't deal with them. Some of them have lost their children, don't deal with them. So I feel bad that they didn't get the experience that I got, that I received, because I didn't lose not one member of my family, like none, not even one, not even the one that's on the outskirts, like none of them. So, and I, the only friends I lost, I think, be honest, it was me and my kid's mom getting divorced is more of the reason why I lost them as friends, not the Christianity.
Right. Mm.
I can only account for no, actually, there's no one that I can think of that I knew personally that decided that they didn't want to deal with me because of Christianity. If they didn't want to deal with me, it was because of something else.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
awesome. That's awesome. That's the hope. That's the goal if we can get it. Um, I did want to wrap up with a couple final things. In a minute, I'm going to ask you to kind of do a plug for your YouTube channel. But before then, could you just give a word of advice for someone who is going through this, but they're maybe earlier on in the stage where they're like, I don't know what I believe yet. I think I kind of still am a Christian, but I also see a lot of issues, and I don't know where this goes, but I do know that people might hate me for it if I ask too many more questions, and they just maybe feel lost. Like I really do want to believe in God. I really do want to go to heaven and all that stuff. I really do want to get back to the basics of what I've been taught all this time, but at the same time, they're torn because they just feel like they can't go back to it and be intellectually honest. What would you say to someone who's kind of facing the perhaps the hardest part, or at least one of the hardest parts of that journey?
Honestly, what I would say to them is that the first thing that you have to the most important thing is discovery of self. The hardest thing for anybody to ever do is to be completely honest with who they are and what they think, what's really going on in your mind, and then be honest as to who you are and how you want to live your life. So the first part is delve into loving and respecting yourself enough that you trust you to make the best decision for you and not someone on the outside. And that no matter what happens, there is a tribe out there for you. And that's the thing. People, we are social creatures. So I get this. There's a struggle that you don't want to leave what you are already comfortable with. But in every situation, for someone to grow, they have to first become uncomfortable. So uh, as you're going through this struggle, knowing yourself and seeking out what speaks to you is the direction that you should go. I'm not saying trade in one religion for another religion. That would probably be the worst thing you could probably do to yourself, is to trade one for another. But to truly come to that understanding that all these stories, when you study for yourself without a landing point, all these stories are created by people. They're created by man. Search out, why did man create the story? When you understand the why of things, you can better understand the thing itself. And to repeat myself, at the end of the day, is being true to yourself, because no one should ever be able to say they love you more than you love yourself. And if you're allowing yourself to stay stuck in this tumultuous life of halfway stuck of believing in something and not wanting to leave your group, but knowing that there's a problem, then you're not loving yourself. You're doing yourself a disservice. You're never going to find true happiness if you love yourself first, because no one else can love you more than you can't love you.
Hmm. I love it. What great advice. And that's a pivotal piece of this, especially for so many of us who had that worm theology just pounded into our heads of like, you are truly born worthless. Even in John 3, you were born condemned. And the idea that it's like the fact that you exist is kind of a problem. You are inherently wicked, and you're like you're not. And I know when I got into Calvinism pretty extensively, they talked about clarifying, like as a pastor, like if you're going to preach it, they said, do not preach this as if you're telling sinners, you are in the ocean drowning, and you're asking God to send you a like a life vest or some kind of, reach out and grab me, Jesus, pull me up. They said, make sure it's clear you're not drowning. You are the corpse at the bottom of the ocean. From the moment you're born, you're the corpse at the bottom of the ocean. You don't need somebody, God, to help you. You're already dead. You need God to
Right.
give you complete righteousness, complete life. Even the faith to say, God, I need you, is a gift from Him. Everything's a gift. It's all of Him. It's all His doing. It's all His glory. But when you get to that sense of being like, wow, I have been beaten down so much, and you realize too that some of this stuff is not just the theology that you have to move past, but it has woven its way into everything that you do. Like I was talking in a live stream last night about how a lot of us end up, when we're in Christianity, we end up creating this self-talk that comes out in certain telltale ways, such as we apologize all the time, like, oh, I'm sorry, oh, I'm sorry, oh, sorry. You realize you're apologizing for your existence. You don't realize it, perhaps. It's just part of the way you do it. But the fact that so many of us apologize for almost everything is an indication that we're truly apologizing for just being here. I'm sorry I'm in the room. I'm sorry I'm taking up the air in the room and the space. I'm sorry I exist. I'm sorry you have to look at me. And that's part of our theology, that's still stuck, the roots that went so deep. And I think a lot of us really do need to take that message to heart of like, if you're going to really heal from this thing, you got to figure out how you don't love yourself and start to undo and unwind those messages.
Yeah.
Mm.
And the love of yourself will help you to do that so greatly.
Yeah, exactly. Well, could you wrap us up maybe with giving a plug for your YouTube channel? Certainly anything else on your mind, but wrap us up with a good word about the great work you're doing and kind of what you hope to do as you expand the channel over the next few years.
Yeah. Um, so first I want to thank you, sir. I want to thank Tim for thank you for having me on your podcast. Is a great honor. The fact that if you had told me 10 years ago that people would actually want to talk to me, I would have told you that you are a lying ass liar. But I do appreciate it. I do appreciate it. It is with great humility that I thank you for allowing me to be up on your show.
Absolutely.
So my channels are, it's called Deconstructing Christianity. I use TikTok, but I don't like people on TikTok. So please follow me on Facebook in my Facebook fan page for Deconstructing Christianity, as well as my YouTube page of Deconstructing Christianity. On the channel, what I do is make videos concerning a lot of response videos to bad pastors or bad historical information or bad translations of information that Christians perpetuate. I am not trying to convince anyone to become a Hermetic or become Buddhist or become any other religion. Just growth in your own personal life, in your own person. Find your tribe and vibrate with your tribe. Do I sometimes do videos about Hermeticism or what I think and what I believe? Yes, and that is usually to the response of someone asking that question. But for the most part, it's about helping people deconstruct with historical, cultural, and political information that influenced why you believe in what you believe, and to point out how immoral Bible is. Because when we really look at the Bible for its morality, one, like Christian apologists would tell you that slavery in the Bible was only condoned as indentured servitude, so it's more like employees, because they're reading Leviticus 25, the first part, that is purely just talking about Israelite to Israelite. But when you continue reading past that part in 25, it says, of the nations and foreigners among you and the nations around you, you may buy them as property and pass them down to your sons. Later on, it tells you that if you beat the slave, that long as they can rise up within a few days, that the master is not to be punished. But if he dies within a few days, if he dies in the early days, then the master is punished. But if he dies after a few days, the master is still not punished, as long as he doesn't die in the first couple of days. People don't like, Christians hate the fact of admitting this, but the transatlantic slave trade was done exactly how the Bible says to do it.
Yeah.
So even though we see it as one of our most recent horrific events in human history, it is based on the Bible teachings. And people don't want to deal with that, but we deal with it on my channel. And yes, I'm a black man who is saying that European Christians, African non-Christians, and African Christians participating in the transatlantic slave trade did it according to the Bible. And if you are a Christian, then you should not have any problems with it. You should say that is how God wanted it. But if you're not Christian, you can recognize the immorality of it. Because what God, who is supposed to be all good, would ever say a man should own another man? That daughters should be sold into wedlock for the availability of giving up their poom poom so they can have children for some other man. That women are just property. That is not a good God. So that God is good all the time is BS.
Yeah.
So those are the kind of things that you'll find on my channel, or
That
things like that.
with
And
the
I do.
slavery thing, just to
Uh-huh.
mention one thing on the slavery thing too, the thing that I thought is such a mind job is there's one passage where it says if somebody buys a slave, like a man, and then he decides I want to buy a female for you so you can have a wife. So you got like now, two slaves, they can start a family and they have kids, that eventually if the original first slave kind of pays off the slave debt or whatever
Mm-hmm.
method there was for freedom, that that doesn't imply that your slave wife and your slave kids get to come with you. All you're doing is buying your own stuff. So it's like
Mm-hmm.
you're free to go. Like, yeah, like what in what world is somebody that loves their wife and kids going to say, "Hey kids, I got free now. So, sorry you're still slaves, but I'm free. I'm going on to start a whole new life." Like that is not a just and righteous perspective from a God, but that's exactly what he says. Like, and it's not really, and it says, that slave can choose to stay if he wants to, but he doesn't have to. But it's like, of course he's going to want to stay because he loves his family. You're screwing with people's literally their blood connections, their family, and putting people in horrific spots where they have to pick between their freedom or their wife and kids. Like that's not a choice, and it's so sick, so disgusting.
That was the loophole. So, according to the Hebrew tradition, the Israelite tradition, you're not supposed to keep a fellow Israelite as a slave. But that was the loophole to keeping a fellow Israelite as a slave, is to give him a wife and a child and the whole thing that you just explained. But it's just a loophole to keep their own people, to enslave their own people as property, which
Yeah.
is which just shows this God loves he loves some slavery, he loves him some genocide, and believe it or not, he loves him some baby sacrifice.
Yeah.
It wasn't until after the Babylonian captivity that the Judite people started moving away from child sacrifice. He loved him some child sacrifice.
Yeah.
Any kind of blood sacrifice, he's all for it. So,
Yeah. And when you look at the cultures of that time, that was exactly, the whole syncretism you touched on earlier. That's exactly what everybody was doing. And it shouldn't surprise us that that was part of their culture too. It's just what everyone did. They thought that their God needed blood and child sacrifice in order for there to be, no famines or there to be rain or victory in a battle. Yeah, that's what you did. And that's how the God gave you, the blessing. But yeah, it's when you really realize that what's going on, it's pretty sick. And you realize, I think a lot of us kind of sum it up this way, like when you're in Christianity and you're thinking it's real, you sing songs like God, you're a good father. But then as you escape it, you realize this guy was a psychopath. And I always
yeah.
like to reference that idea of like, if you were proposing, for example, to, say you're engaged to be married and you get down on one knee, pull out the ring, and you're like, sweetie, I love you so much, and we're going to have a great life together. I will take care of you. I want you to love me, and I will love you. And it's like, it's all this is sweet. And, you're about to get engaged. It's a sweet proposal, but she's about to, you can tell she's about to say, yes, I'd love to. And you say, hold on one more second. I need to clarify something. I hope you're going to say yes. But if you don't, I've got a baseball bat in my trunk and I will beat the shit out of you forever if you say no. But, this is real love. And this
Right.
is romance. I'm like, this is the definition of love, this conversation. But if you say no, you will be in torture forever. So what do you want to do? You want to marry me or not? Like you would call the police on such a person, and yet Yahweh's a good father. It's like this is so sick. What the hell were we in?
And that's why I had to walk away from it
Yeah,
because that is a sick notion. I mean, I couldn't worship. How can you worship something that is that sick? And then when I started to realize, like, if there is a true God, like I'm more agnostic. If there's a true God, that God would not require me to worship. Because if a God needed to be worshipped or required worship or has to have worship, then that means that that God is lacking something. And you cannot be God if you are lacking anything. You cannot be the creator of all things, but lacking something. And what that which you lack would be a greater power than you. So
yeah,
anytime a God requires worship or requires any kind of anything, not a God. It's not the God, just something else. It's kind of like what they say. Any alien with enough technology that is so so far superior to what we can recognize would be considered a God. So
yeah, exactly.
it's something else. It ain't God. If Yahweh was something that was on the earth, splitting the Red Sea and all that stuff, it wasn't God. It was somebody else that people couldn't distinguish between technology and a God. But
Yeah,
it ain't God.
I love
So,
that movie, Stargate. Have you seen that one?
oh yeah. So,
That's basically that concept where the all these gods that they worshiped, and even kind of put it in the context of ancient Egypt, but they kind of make this in the storyline. They're like ancient Egypt was actually there's other planets that look like ancient Egypt, so they have pyramids on this planet and that planet. That's how their
mm,
spaceships would, go back and
the
forth.
spaceship land on the pyramid, yeah.
But when you look at the god characters of those storylines, they are just creatures that had super advanced technology. That's all, but they were worshipped as gods. And it's a great, I know it's not, it's just science fiction, but it's a great example of what you're saying. Like if that God did exist, it'd just be an example that they've had, a million years. Like imagine what we could do if we don't destroy ourselves by nuclear war and we don't get hit by a asteroid. If we just keep on evolving our, as especially our technology, imagine in a million years what our technology is going to be like. Yeah, to somebody else that's in the Stone Age, we're going to look like gods. Absolutely.
Yeah. I'm a big Trekkie. So when there are plenty of episodes in whatever version of Star Trek that you want to watch, where there's a situation that is exactly like that, where some group of people on some planet, primitive planet, sees them, and then next thing they know, they start worshiping. We don't have to even go that far. Have you ever heard of the cargo cult?
Yeah. Hmm.
Just right there on those American Samoa Islands, they still worship John From because they saw airplanes. They moved them from one island to another, and they still worship American military soldiers because they thought that they were God. It would stand to reason that the Sumerians, the Egyptians, if they did see the Aztecs, they drew people in flying devices. So did the Indus. It's plausible that they saw what I think a pre Younger Dryas civilizations that failed during the Younger Dryas freeze and the Younger Dryas flood. I think they may have seen whatever civilization survived prior to that. But if it wasn't a pre-Earth advanced civilization, some alien, it's possible. That's more possible. That's more plausible to me than God, than the God of this Bible.
Yeah.
I'm
Agreed.
willing. I'm more willing to accept ancient aliens, and I know that's a bunch of holes in that than
It's
I
pretty
am to
crazy when science fiction is more plausible than Yahweh. It's crazy. Well,
because Yahweh is science fiction. He's a comic
yeah,
book.
exactly. It really is. It's in this. I love my channel's motto when it first comes up is, harmonic atheist and then hashtag Christianity is mythology. And the minute you realize it, like really realize it, it's like, oh, I have been so duped. This is
Yeah.
crazy. Like, of course, and that answers all your questions. Like, of course, Jesus walking on water, healing the blind, all this stuff, rising from the dead, all this stuff, blood magic, scapegoating. That's exactly what all these ancient mythologies were doing. It's just another form, arguably in some ways better than some forms, but it's still just another form.
Yeah. Have you seen the movie called The Man from Earth?
It doesn't ring a bell.
Oh, you might like it. It's just it's a talkie, and it's basically about a Neanderthal man who from the Proleolithic period who just doesn't die. but doesn't know why he doesn't die. Doesn't die, doesn't age. And he's getting ready to move away from his college, move away, and all his friends are like, "Why are you moving?" So he starts telling them the story of his life. And there's a part in there where he explains that he went to Tibet, he went to India, learned from a guy named Buddha, Siddhartha, came back, became an Etruscan, but didn't like the way Rome was, started teaching the Buddhist teachings, all got mistranslated, and how he was, they all got legendized. But basically says that all just, he was just a man trying to teach people how to be good people. They bastardized the hell out of the story.
Yeah, exactly. I think
And
that's probably the majority of these mythologies is somebody had a real person, a real king or a real teacher in their
yeah,
lives and they loved him and they just added fluff until it got out of hand.
yeah, it's called A Man from Earth. You should watch it. That's just all talking. It's no fighting, no
Yeah.
fast cars. It's all talking, but it's good.
Awesome.
It's great.
Yeah. I'll look that up. Well, thank you so much. Well, as always, I love to just kind of say at the end, the biggest thing for me is just I'm so glad you escaped. I'm so glad that your story did include you walking away from the lies. And I love too that you were able to take the path of being public. I know not everybody can, it's not always safe. Like even we talked about with the pastors, sometimes it's not time yet. But I love that your journey allowed you to speak up, and I hope your voice gets louder and louder in this. I love what you're doing. So thank you so much, and keep going. We need your voice in the community. But Lorenzo, I really appreciate your time today.
I appreciate you, and right back at you with your growth as well. I ain't gonna go through the whole thing. Just right back at ditto.
Thank you, thank you. Well, I'll wrap up by saying we've been speaking with Larenzo Reid. Again, the YouTube channel. I'll have a link beneath this video. Please go like and subscribe. Lorenzo, again, thanks so much. Great to get to know you today.
Appreciate you, Tim.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.